Hello, great ones. Welcome to another episode of the Live and Be Great podcast. I'm your host, Latonya McDonald. And on today's episode, I wanted to speak on pain and how sometimes we assume that just because someone may have experienced the same type of pain we have experienced, we often believe that that person will be empathetic towards you and they understand where you're coming from. And that is not often the case. When you share pain with someone, you feel seen. You feel like you're not alone. And there is an element where judgment can occur based on where someone is in their journey at times. Just because someone may have survived that same type of pain that you experienced doesn't necessarily mean that they are safe for you or safe with with your story, or even that you are safe for them based off of your perception of what happened to you. People can understand exactly how something feels, but still lack the empathy. And I chose this topic because I keep seeing people use their survival story to dismiss someone else's pain, and that is very disheartening. And it's something that we don't often talk about. The shame that comes along with your experience, your painful experience. Sometimes it can disguise itself as strength, advice, or accountability just by the acknowledgement. But before we talk about the harm this causes, we have to understand what may be happening underneath that judgment. So there's so many different factors as to why that judgment occurs. Sometimes people are still ashamed that they may have been victimized. So relating in a way that you relate, they feel as if they acknowledge that, hey, someone did something to me that caused me this great deal of pain. Does that make me weak? Also, some people believe if they made it out alive, that's all that they need, because if they admit that, hey, this actually traumatized me, then they feel like they've lost something or that they're broken. And they will separate themselves from the victims, feeling as if they identify with them. They're weak because they're still kind of projecting. So they want to believe that they were stronger, or they knew better, or they handled it differently. And judgment, it does, that projection can sometimes feel as though it's protecting them from grieving the safety and the lack of protection, their dignity, their inability to reverse what happened. And they don't have to face that version of them that they lost. Now, this is one of the possibilities of a psychological pattern. It's not a diagnosis of every survivor who responds without empathy, but these are some of the reasons why this may happen, as to why you can't seem to understand why, if we can relate on this and your story sounds so similar to mine, you can't see yourself in me, you know? This becomes especially dangerous when that shame shapes how people talk to someone in a toxic or abusive relationship. And sidebar, even when some people feel as though it's not as deep, like the generational wars, millennials against Gen X or against boomers, or boomers against Gen Z or millennials and vice versa, your parents versus you, and so on and so forth. They can say things like, you guys will never would have been able to survive my childhood. I'm softer on you. You guys are soft, right? Because admitting that, no, I actually went through trauma, but sometimes they don't even know. Sometimes they are using it as a badge of honor. Sometimes people feel like that's all they have to protect themselves, to avoid what truly happened. Some people don't have the knowing, because they didn't process it as to how it shows up in their life, how that pain continues to shape how they make certain decisions, or why they may feel anxious or unmotivated or uninspired or stuck, or as if they can't stand up for themselves in certain spaces, or as to why they settle for certain things. They don't know it. Not everybody has a psychology degree. Not everybody has done the work. There's a lot of people that just leave it as, I am alive, so I have no trauma. And they often forget, especially when children become teenagers, they forget what it was like to be a child. That's one of the more basic and more broad examples of, wait a minute, so when grandpa did this to you, how did you feel? Don't talk about how you feel now. Talk about how you feel then. Well, mom, dad, that's how I feel now, right? And again, this becomes especially dangerous when that shame shapes how people talk to someone in a toxic or abusive relationship. When you say, why didn't they just leave, or just leave, the survivor may hear, I left, so why can't you? From someone who still feels ashamed that they once stayed. And we often neglect that leaving can involve danger. Money, housing, children, pets, transportation, immigration, disability, religion, family pressure, reputation, retaliation, all those things. It's not as easy as just leave. Even that survivor may have not pieced that together. They're just looking at the end result. And someone can be in that relationship, can know that it's harmful, and still not believe that leaving is currently possible. And I get that, especially during these times when the world is in disarray. Some people may say the world is always in disarray, but these times when it's noticeable makes it more difficult. And if you're trying to support someone in this situation, you can care deeply. And if you do the wrong thing, or if you say just leave, or if you just pull up to the house, or if you're not careful, you can increase the danger by confronting, exposing, or pressuring, or trying to control the situation. Why didn't they leave? And yes, as painful as it is, when you feel as though you are connecting with another survivor and you hear something like that, and you actually know their story, it can be extremely painful and off-putting, and it doesn't feel good. And you feel like a violation, a dismissal, you know? They can other themselves. You can feel like they may think that they're better than you because they've left, or they didn't have to think about the things that you have to think about when you think about leaving. Just leave is definitely not a safety plan. And when you're trying to support someone, you may feel as though, okay, well, I have a similar story, but the just leave because I left is just not, that's not everybody's that's not gonna turn out the same way oftentimes if we don't pause and really consider the danger and any barriers or obstacles that may affect them leaving safely. And when celebrities or commentators or public figures repeat dismissive language, it can reinforce the shame survivors already carry. These public conversations about abuse, I can oftentimes, when I hear a celebrity that is a survivor speak, how they speak about what they've gone through, to my eye, because I have a psychology degree and I've worked with survivors, I can't diagnose them, but I can see patterns that show that they may not have perceived what they've gone through in a way that is healthy for them and healthy for how they look at other survivors or how their fans may view abuse. And, you know, sometimes they could be listening while they're still deciding whether to believe themselves based off of how they view what happened to them. Saying things like, well, she forgave him, can pressure a survivor to forgive before they feel safe or ready. And forgiveness, a lot of times people confuse that with access. And plenty of times the abuser themselves will use an example, a public example, as to, oh, this person forgave their spouse or their partner. Why can't you forgive me? You love this person. Saying things like everybody deserves grace can become harmful when accountability disappears. Or it only happened once, and what did she do? Reinforces the minimization and self-blame. And another survivor's personal choice should not become a rule for how everyone else must respond. It shouldn't. I'm not diagnosing these public figures or, claiming to know their private healing, their motives or mental state. I am looking at verified public events and the language people use around them, because that language affects real survivors. It truly does. One of the examples is Kelly Rowland, Chris Brown, and Rihanna. Kelly Rowland publicly addressed an abusive past relationship through her song Dirty Laundry. And then later, in 2022, she defended Chris Brown at the American Music Awards when he received people booing. Chris Brown pleaded guilty in 2009 to felony assault involving Rihanna, and many people do not know that wasn't the first time that he had been violent towards Rihanna, right? That's the time that made it to the public. And when people see an example like this, the point is not to declare why Kelly responded that way. We have to be aware of what survivors may hear when grace for that person who caused harm and continues to cause harm, all right? Because we talk about accountability and grace, receives more attention than accountability or concern for the victims, Another public example is Megan Thee Stallion and Tory Lanez. Tory Lanez was convicted and sentenced to prison for shooting Megan Thee Stallion. She still faces jokes, disbelief, scrutiny, and public victim blaming. Her confidence, her sexuality, her anger, her career, or her imperfect choices did not erase what happened to her. I'm very sensitive to what this young lady, feels, and I'm not trying to get everybody to agree with that, but sometimes people pick and choose who they're going to give empathy to, even if they themselves are a survivor, especially if that survivor does not fit people's preferred image of a victim. Megan herself said that maybe she had died, people may then have believed her. And when other survivors use this example as a way to other themselves, it can be extremely damaging to those watching. Things like this oftentimes enforces that victim should stay silent because of her treatment. These examples, they definitely connect to a larger pressure placed on Black women to extend grace, remain loyal, absorb pain, or think about protecting Black men's image, even when Black women are the people who are being harmed. That's a lot to carry, right? And I'm not trying to assign that private motive to Kelly, Rihanna, Megan, or any individual woman. I am naming a cultural pressure that can influence how people talk about abuse, accountability, and loyalty. That is how we enter the trap of the perfect victim. Because no matter what the survivor does, somebody changes the rules. And to be honest, survivors are blamed no matter how they respond, which is so sad. If they stay, people ask, why did they not leave? Even though they don't take into account the age, the mindset, the barriers, the obstacles that exist. If they leave, people ask why they waited so long. Oh, you have this many kids and you this old or you this age. What took you so long? It's a whole process there. That's a human being that you're talking about. Same reason you haven't left whatever situation. And I guarantee you, a lot of people that's saying that, they still in some situation. They still haven't gone after that one thing based off of where they are mentally in their journey. Highly possible that they haven't taken that step yet someplace. Or know what it feels like. If they speak, they are called attention seeking. If they sue, they want money. They just care about the money. They just want a payday, take advantage. If they remain silent, they're called complicit. If they are angry, they're bitter. If they're calm, people assume it was not serious. If they forgive, their forgiveness is used against others. And if they do not forgive, they are accused of holding on to hate. And back to that bitter conversation. Again, forgiveness does not mean access, right? There is no perfect way to survive trauma. It doesn't exist. The perfect victim does not exist because people committed to victim blaming will always move the goalpost depending on how they view the abuser, how they connect to the abuser, how they are still processing their own abuse, which is the dark side of looking for support from other survivors. And this pattern is not limited to domestic violence, as I spoke earlier, when it comes to childhood. It also shows up inside cultures, families, and communities that share oppression. As to how many Caucasian women voted against their own interest, right? Or how many uneducated white people that are elder and on Medicaid stated, oh, I'm going to vote for this president because he's going to get rid of Obamacare, right? Doesn't matter that you think Obamacare is just for Black people based off of your own understanding, but you couldn't even connect to what it would be like for other people. I don't want anybody else to experience what it's like for me to not have my health care in place, right? Very painful. It's an opinion, right? People can definitely share oppression, but still shame one else for speaking. Still shame. People can share oppression, but still shame someone for speaking about it because they're ashamed oftentimes. They may be ashamed because they weren't brave enough to speak up about it, or they just feel like they can't, right? A Black person can experience racism and still dismiss another Black person's, for naming the racism. A woman can experience sexism and still shame another woman for speaking about misogyny. Someone from a strict family, faith, or culture may say, "We all went through it. Stop complaining." Or, "You're making us look bad." Mm-hmm. Have you heard that before? Because I sure have. Some people confuse silence with strength because silence was how they survived. That was their defense mechanism. Not talking about it, blocking it out, right? That selective empathy humanizes the person we identify with while denying context or humanity to the person who triggers us. That shared oppression does not automatically create shared empathy. It just doesn't. Accountability and compassion are not opposing forces. We do not have to dehumanize Black men to protect Black women. And we don't have to minimize Black women's pain to show compassion for Black men. They can both exist in the same space. It doesn't have to be a competition. So the final question is not whether we relate to someone's experience. It is whether our response centers their needs or brings the conversation back to us, right? Now, if you've done this, because I think we all might be guilty, even as simple as your graduating high school class, right? My class was better than your class. Or when we were in school, we weren't allowed to do this. You guys couldn't survive. If you've done this before, there's a different way to respond to someone's pain without the shame, the control, the comparison, or propping up your own story. Try replacing "why didn't you leave" with "what made leaving feel unsafe or impossible." Replace "I would never let that happen" with "I'm sorry survival became that complicated." Replace "you should be over it" with "healing does not follow a deadline." Replace "we all went through it" with "you deserve support then and you deserve support now." Pay attention not only to what someone survived, but to how they talk about people who are still surviving it. I know exactly how you feel because I went through the same thing. May sound supportive, but it can center my experience instead of others. A more empathetic response is, "I may share part of this experience, but I am not you. I believe you, and I want to understand what this has been like for you." Shared experience can inform empathy, but it cannot replace listening. Yeah, sometimes you don't want to share or hear from somebody that hasn't been through a similar situation. Sometimes that's what you go looking for first when you feel as though you need a safe place to land, right? That shared experience, of course, and unfortunately, is not proof of that emotional safety. And you definitely have to listen to someone's language because these situations, life, your experiences are very, very complex, right? Does it make room for that complexity? Does it make room for that accountability, that the choice and compassion? And notice whether their response helps the survivor feel clearer and safer or more ashamed. Ask yourself, where have I assumed someone was safe simply because they shared my experience? All time, every day, all the time, every day, all day. I've definitely done that. Also, ask yourself, where have I judged someone for pain I also carry? Mm. Could it be that you haven't gotten to where you need to be just yet when it comes to that pain? You are not what happened to you, right? And also, this is why I'm currently developing an ebook called Don't Just Tell Them to Leave, a practical guide to helping a loved one leave a toxic or abusive relationship safely. And when it becomes available, the link will be added to this episode's description. Okay? And I wanted to develop a guide to help supporters offer safer, more practical, and more informed support instead of leading with panic, judgment, pressure, control. Their intentions may be good, but some people, they really, really need to slow down. They really need to slow down, and I want actual effective help and solutions out there, okay? Because this episode discusses abuse and survivor safety, I will include support and safety resources, all right? So, thank you guys for tuning in today. And I do want you to remember that the shared pain can create connection, but only processed pain creates compassion. Okay? You can't give yourself grace, you can't give grace to any other person, right? People reveal their capacity for empathy through how they speak about those who are still struggling. They do. Accountability and compassion can exist in the same conversation. And the good one is forgiveness does not mean access, right? And I think rejection is protection might fit here too. If you're rejected by a fellow survivor, don't give them your story. Don't give them any more of your time. They're not ready. They're not healthy for you at this time. Survival is not the same as healing, everybody. And shared experience is not the same as empathy. Okay? All right. Thank you all for listening to another episode of the Live and Be Great podcast. Until next time, give yourself permission to not just live, but to live and be great.